Hello everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all, and today I want to discuss one of our favorite topics here on the channel, consent. Because I've been seeing some worrying trends on social media in the way people talk about consent, especially regarding BDSM and so-called extreme activities. And I want to set the record straight. Consent is the backbone of our community, and if people don't understand what that really means or looks like, I have no idea how we're going to have deeper conversations about this. So I was originally inspired to make this because I made the mistake of logging into Twitter for the first time in a while, and immediately, like the second post I saw, was by someone who I will call a kink critical radical feminist. That's somebody that I follow responded to. And I'm not going to share the exact details, but suffice to say that they took a couple of stills from a TikTok and then they reposted them to Twitter for their audience. And they left the username and face of this person plainly visible while ridiculing them with the following caption. The girl came in TikTok to revel about how her BDSM master intentionally gave her a black eye using some technique where you hit the person over and over instead of really hard. I love it. It's so pretty. Hell no. And yes, the stills of the TikTok do show someone with a light black eye on one side. At the time I'm writing this, the tweet has been viewed nearly 2 million times, and the original TikTok, by comparison, has just over 550 likes. And then when I looked into it and checked the social media stats of the TikTok user who was being talked about here, it appeared that their original account was gone, but they probably had around, let's say, 35,000 followers roughly. And now their other smaller accounts get in the tens of views. Not tens of thousands, just tens. So this is, by all measure, just dogpiling onto a small account in an attempt to shame them. You can practically hear the revulsion in that ending, hell no. And am I saying that you need to like black eyes or that you should go out and get one for yourself? Of course not. It's even fine to be disgusted by black eyes. What is not okay, though, is policing someone else's ability to consent or inferring that they are being mistreated or brainwashed because seeing a black eye makes you uncomfortable. You can only imagine how the comments deteriorated after this, because of course, this wasn't an invitation to have a nuanced dialogue about feminism and consent under the patriarchy. It was just dunking, plain and simple. All the predictable greatest hits came out. Why do they always look like that? These people are always so ugly. This has got to be some form of mental illness, and so on. But what I found most galling were not the bottom tier potshots about someone's appearance, because sadly those are a dime a dozen online. No, it was these comments. The ones about how this proves why rapists love BDSM, how this is an example of why abusers love the kink community, how this is evidence of victims not only enabling their own abuse, but how they cause more of it to occur in the community and the world at large. The underlying sentiment is clearly, you can't really consent to something like this, and abusers and bad actors love that you just let them take advantage of you in public. Or even that consent is meaningless in this context because individual consent matters less than the perceived negative impact your behavior may have on women or society as a whole. And it's important for me to note at this stage that the person in these TikToks did call these marks beautiful, and they said that they loved them. They were also smiling and seemed legitimately happy about having these marks. When I looked up their TikToks to get a fuller picture of what happened, because I never trust secondhand retellings of Twitter stories where the person involved clearly hates the subject they're talking about, all of that was totally corroborated. Just in case anyone thought these comments were legitimate in any fashion because it was someone sharing an activity that wasn't totally consensual or that they regretted it or something like that. Not the case at all. It was immediately clear they wanted this, they knew what they were getting into, and they like the results. So why all the fuss then? Well, from my perspective, this seems to boil down to two things: the conflation of dangerous acts with non-consent and people's knee-jerk emotional reactions to seeing something they exclusively associate with DV.
Editing Evie here. So a lot of the text that you guys are seeing on screen right now are pieces of replies that I didn't notice when I was originally scripting the video. And looking back on them now, they are way worse than what I remembered seeing at the time, like talking about how, she's definitely an abuse victim and that she's probably going to be offed by her partner, and that these sorts of people only make it out one way. And I have to speak a little euphemistically because even for my standards on YouTube, it's pretty graphic stuff. And it's horrifying to me because if you're gonna pretend like you care about victims of DV online, why are you dogpiling on someone that you think could be a victim of DV? Like, how is that helpful in any way? That is not something that helps people get out of bad relationships or homes. Like, you're just rubbernecking at what you perceive to be as a traumatic, terrible car wreck and going, oh, well, if only they would have remembered to wear their seatbelts. Like, what are you doing? It just drives me nuts. Anyways, just wanted to point that out because it's truly horrific, and making these kinds of comments is not advocacy. It doesn't help anybody. It might make you feel emotionally superior in some way, but it is not supportive of people who are victims if that's what you think you're doing for some reason.
I have discussed my grievances with pleasure-based enthusiastic consent before in this channel. The model of enthusiastic consent, which preaches that everything that is not a rosy heck yes is a no, was widely promoted on college campuses to combat the most common coercive behaviors and consent violations that take place in that kind of space. It had good intentions, and when it comes to one-time hookups with strangers in ambiguous settings like a party, it's a pretty good rule of thumb to follow. And I'm not saying that we should change the standard that when you're doing something for the first time with a brand new person, you should ensure they want it unambiguously, free of coercion or pressure. But thanks to either some combination of poor reading comprehension skills or people making assumptions about the vibes of enthusiastic consent, this framework has mutated in ways that are not helpful when you try to apply it to how other people besides yourself are consenting, or when people consent in contexts that are a little bit more nuanced than a vanilla first time at a party. For one reason or another, people have largely taken enthusiastic consent to implicitly apply only to activities that are directly fun, pleasurable, and enjoyable for all of those involved. Because, who would be enthusiastic about having a bad time, right? Those cancel each other out. And if something goes wrong or is painful or is too extreme, then you can't really have consented to it because it didn't really seem like you enjoyed yourself, so therefore your consent could not have been enthusiastic. Or there's no way you could have because it's unthinkable that someone might enjoy getting a bruise, even if they're smiling the whole time. And heaven forbid if somebody cries or screams during the experience, then it's unambiguous that they couldn't have possibly really liked it or consented to it. In short, it's seen that painful equal bad equal non-consensual, and pleasurable equal good equal consensual. You can only imagine what this does to people who may not have consented up front but then experienced pleasure anyways, or the inverse of that. This is why it's not a good universal heuristic for consent. This conflation is way too simplistic and leads to the conclusion that some types of violations can't really be violations that are all that important, and that some types of consensual acts can't really possibly be consensual because there's no way that any rational, healthy person would be enthusiastic about them. This combines with radical feminist beliefs about BDSM and the patriarchy in a sort of unholy consent police union. There is no way that a woman could really consent to a man hitting her in the face like that. Can't she see how she's being oppressed and enabling other women to be abused because of her behavior? So therefore, we should attack her to make sure she knows that she's not in her proper place. But somehow, I guess doing that's not enforcing the patriarchy in its own way. And what's frustrating about all of this is that people are using the aesthetics of something to judge whether or not another person was capable of consenting to an activity these third parties have nothing to do with. They see a black eye, they freak out about how extreme and horrible that must be, and reject it outright. Because if something even looks like DV, there's no way a woman could ever really consent to it happening. The substance of the relationship doesn't matter. The context doesn't matter. How the person got the mark doesn't matter. Just, nope, that looks icky and gross, ew, bad, awful, yuck. Here's the thing, though. Consent isn't based on aesthetics. It isn't even based just on enthusiasm, not when it comes to most long-term kink relationships. It's based on a combination of factors, none of which has anything to do with how it looks from the outside or the social stigma that may be attached to the activities involved. The framework I prefer to use, the Fry's model, specifies that consent must be freely given, revocable, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. Notice how none of that says it has to be safe, normal, or good for society or anything like that. It does still include enthusiastic as an access, which, as we just discussed, is a little bit problematic, but if we're just going to take it to mean stuff that you want to do without any value judgments or baggage about what wanting has to superficially look like, I think that still makes sense in a kink context. The Fry's model was developed by Planned Parenthood, and I have to imagine that they took a lot of time to consider what to include in their acronym and what to leave out. I think the absence of safe or normal is intentional, because people can consent to things that are unsafe, as long as they do so in an informed way. That's also why the kink community came up with terms like RAC. That's the axis that is the most important, is being informed. People choose to get tattoos, knowing that it may impact their ability to get hired for certain jobs. People choose to drink alcohol, knowing that it'll lower their inhibitions. People choose to eat leftover pizza that sat on the counter overnight, knowing that it might make them sick later. Adults have autonomy, including the autonomy to make boneheaded decisions that we as spectators may believe they'll come to regret later. Regret or negative consequences don't mean that someone didn't really consent. Consent is not a panacea that means everything is going to turn out okay in the end. It is only the first baseline step you need to take to ensure something is happening in alignment with a person's autonomy. But people don't generally freak out en masse when someone decides to have vanilla sex without a condom with the guy they've just met that night, even though it's a much more common and reasonably high-risk activity. Because in most other contexts, even if we might bemoan someone making a decision we wouldn't, we don't usually browbeat them about not knowing what's best for them in an infantilizing and frankly patriarchal way. But for some reason, when it comes to BDSM, people are way more happy to do that because of their revulsion towards the aesthetics of certain kinks, rather than because it's actually more dangerous. Someone getting food poisoning from their room temp orange chicken is probably more serious than someone having a bruise they like and knew would happen. But outside of that one YouTuber who makes videos talking about people who re-microwave the same rice a dozen times or whatever, most people are not making million-view threads about someone who gave themselves food poisoning in order to lecture them and shame them. You can't clutch your pearls and claim you're just concerned for someone's safety and well-being when there is zero evidence that they are actually in danger. And again, based on what I read, this black eye was highly intentional, planned, carefully done, and conducted in a fully informed way. It wasn't the result of a wanton backhand or explosive anger. It was an on-purpose thing that's about as on-purpose gets, and everyone involved seemingly liked what happened and the results of it. But that's the problem when you focus on aesthetics over substance. When you focus on what you think DV looks like versus what DV actually is, your attention goes to the wrong targets. I really needed to be explained to me how someone describing the process of carefully getting a bruise they knew they wanted in the exact way they wanted it in a loving long-term relationship is enabling more violence against women. How is that proof that abusers love BDSM? The truth is, abusers can hide in any community. And trust me, they do at BDSM as well. We've talked about that many times before. But because we talk so much about consent and safe words and make sure all participants are fully informed of the risks they're taking on, because not all activities are 100% safe, it's a lot harder to get away with certain behaviors in broad daylight, at least in the public community. Our community structure helps keep each other safe, using universally understood safe words, community education efforts, whisper networks, and the normalization of vetting and explicit upfront negotiation and sober play, none of which are features in standard private vanilla sexuality. The most you could maybe say, which I think is the implication being made, is that because someone can walk around with a bruise on their face and claim it's consensual, it means people can get away with causing non-consensual facial bruises, and no one would question it because it's been normalized. But here's the thing. Facial bruises are not a common thing in BDSM. I can recall one person I know who has gotten a facial bruise on purpose, and only one who has done any type of non-slapping strike on the face regularly. And hey, just to be totally honest, I am a person who does a lot of face slapping. I don't do anything like super extreme, and I don't do it to try and get bruises, but I do scenes involving mild to moderate facial slapping several times a month, and heavier slapping a couple times a year. And I have never, to this day, gotten a facial bruise. And I think that maybe might partially be because I use a retinol, and I think there's some effect of that makes you more resistant to bruising on your face. But the point is, your average sub is not showing up to a munch sporting a black eye. It would be a topic of conversation, or at least people would notice it. And if you were to ask your friend, oh hey, is that from your scene on Saturday? I missed it. You might pick up on how they describe that experience, whether they seem happy or sad or trying to avoid direct questions about it. And the funny thing is the people making a connection between visuals and abuse being enabled by BDSM may not even realize how many people in the community are also just like them. I know of a few people who have had, let's call them interventions staged for them because other people simply could not believe that 24/7 power exchange could be healthy, or that a 15-year age gap between a 35 and 50-year-old was okay, or whatever, because they have the exact same kinds of concerns as these vanilla outsiders do. So it's not like the kink community is some kind of abuse-enabling hive mind either. Lots of people in the kink world also try to question and police what other people are doing in private, especially when it comes to visually extreme kinks. So the idea that this would remain unnoticed if someone was walking around with black eyes constantly because BDSM is a den of nothing but the most hardcore freaks imaginable is frankly laughable. Because no one, not even rad femmes or conservatives, will ever be as judgmental towards kinky people as other kinky people. And by the way, I have not even talked about how insulting it is to survivors to equate visuals with abuse. So much abuse is not visual at all. Many survivors feel that their experiences don't really count because it doesn't match the idea we're presented with in the media of a woman cowering in the corner while a man raises a fist to hit her again. Abuse is not about giving a partner consensual pain or leaving an unconventional mark on their body. It's about a pervasive pattern of coercive control. Not one-off scenes, not something that looks uncomfortable to an outsider, but an ongoing dynamic in which one person isolates, threatens, and intimidates another. Someone happily, freely choosing to do something they enjoyed is not that. And if you can't tell the difference and spend your time online conflating the two, you are not helping women. You are not raising awareness. You are making it harder for victims to get help by promoting tired stereotypes of abuse while also paternalistically infantilizing adult women in consensual relationships. But okay, maybe there are a couple of people out there who actually are concerned for women, and they still believe that doing BDSM, even if it might individually be consensual, is bad for women on the whole and needs to be critiqued. And for those people, I would now like to introduce a new model of consent that I haven't discussed before on my channel, CRISP. While this model was developed for the entertainment world, I think it also applies well to BDSM. It takes the core features of FRIES, which is revocable, informed, and specific, and adds considered and participatory on top. The considered element exists as a way to make sure people are thinking about the inherent power dynamics involved in what they do, whether that be through employment or the dominance of the patriarchy in our society. And no, just thinking about it is not a cure-all, I'm not saying that, but it does invite people to consider ways to lessen the effects of structural oppression on their thinking and their decision-making process. I suspect that won't be enough for some, but I would much rather personally lean on the side of promoting autonomy and free choice than lean on the side of social shame and stigma. I don't want to live in a world where women are policing each other sexually, so I am not going to promote methods where that's the outcome, like, shaming women for promoting the patriarchy through having a consensual BDSM relationship. And I do wonder, for those who think considered is not enough for BDSM, would they also be against interracial relationships because structural racism is still a thing? Would they be against relationships between someone who makes $35,000 a year and someone who makes $155,000 a year because of classism? I mean, some of them are universally against age gap relationships and all heterosexual relationships for similar reasons, but as I've already discussed at length elsewhere, expecting wide adoption of such beliefs is highly unlikely and is not something that I think is fruitful to focus on as a solution because it is simply not tenable. Straight women are not going to stop dating men. It's not going to happen. Sorry. But getting back to the subject at hand, the other part of CRISP, participatory, is something I really like. It replaces enthusiasm and emphasizes that people should actively decide what they do and what happens to their bodies. This is great because it removes the tendency to normatively judge what enthusiasm has to look like or what it can come from. Participatory is more neutral, and an active involvement can do a lot to combat unequal power dynamics. It would definitely scare off a lot of consent violator types who often use a sort of leave it to me, I'll plan everything type approach to trick someone into a situation that they would not have otherwise consented to. And so I'm hoping that gives some people some more food for thought. I am not immune to the perspective of certain radical feminists who do really legitimately care and worry about the safety of women. When I do BDSM, I am thinking about, okay, how do my choices impact other women around me? What am I doing that might impact larger society? And how are my choices influenced by how I was raised and the culture I come from? Like, I'm not immune to that, but the logical conclusions that radical feminism in that vein tends to lead to, as I was talking about, aren't practical. Okay, this logic means that straight women can't date men or have sex with men ever, and if you ever do that, you're against womankind on the whole. It's not practical, it's not going to work, so why am I taking stock of their opinions when their solutions, the only ones they have, which is just don't do a thing you like, don't date the people you like, don't have sex you like, it's not going to work. So why am I looking at that? So I like thinking about other ways that we can address what I think could be a fair concern, which is, okay, how might engaging in BDSM affect social structures around the patriarchy? Okay, and I think the CRISP model gives some ways to think about that. That's not telling people, don't love what you love, don't date people that you're attracted to, because again, as I've already said a couple times now, that is simply not going to be the end game. And I do really wonder, okay, if we're worried about enabling structural issues through the choices we make in our intimate relationships, what other types of intimate relationships should we cut off and not participate in order to avoid creating a permission structure for them in wider society? But in any case, those are my thoughts about that. I am legitimately trying to reduce my amount of time on Twitter because I keep seeing things like this, and it is frankly exhausting. And a lot of this conversation reminds me of a topic we discussed a couple of months ago about somebody who went really, really viral for posting their own bruises from a scene they did, and even other queer and trans people being like, oh my gosh, how dare you? And it really comes from all sides, and BDSM is far from being accepted. And I really do hope that this will calm down, because much worse things are happening, and it does feel a little strange that, like, there's a pretty sizable pocket of feminists online whose main mode of interacting on social media seems to be just like making fun of kinky people. And if you're making fun of people and how they look, why do you think I should take your opinions about what needs to be done to help women in society seriously if out of one side of your mouth you're making fun of how people look and, you know, sort of normatively judging them for not meeting what you think is society's standards for being attractive as a woman, while also saying, like, oh my gosh, doing BDSM is so damaging for womankind. Like, well, you know what else damages womankind on the whole? A lot of things, one of which is judging them for not looking feminine enough in a traditional way. Maybe we should actually focus on that, because I think that is something that we could actually solve. Like, we could encourage people not to bully others for not having long enough hair, or having noses that are too wide, or like being overweight or whatever, right? Like we could actually work on that. Maybe let's start there. Anyways, I'm rambling now. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope that you did enjoy this. Consent is a fantastic thing, and I always love thinking about it in a more complex way, because in BDSM it's really hard, and the BDSM community is definitely prone to not always having the best way of avoiding policing other people's ability to consent. I have certainly seen many conversations on FetLife about, you know, oh my gosh, this person could not have possibly really consented because look at this super extreme thing they did, and it's just like really tiring. You know, let people have their kinks, stick to your kinks, and be in community spaces that share your values, really, at the end of the day. And that being said, hope you all enjoyed this. Would love to hear your thoughts about this one in a comment down below. And if you would like to, you can go ahead and subscribe, because I make videos twice a week, but all different kink and BDSM related subjects. And finally, if you want to support what I do, the best way is the Patreon. That will be down below. If you do already support over there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.